Oh hell, internet. I was heading in this direction last time, but part two is history. History is very complex, and of course, I do not know most of it, but I'm going to try and paint with a broad brush and talk about superpowers. Broadly, there are four superpowers, all of which are traumatized in some way by the 20th century. Europe is really a fading superpower and actually may have been overtaken already economically and politically by another part of the world. It's broken from what we would call the fall of the old world, I guess. Then there is China, which has been historically the most insular of the superpowers. It has started to put its influence out into the world recently, and is this a sign of some shift? Who knows? But China is also recovering from its own traumas. I once heard China described as a really tough old man, wise and learned, but getting old now, who's just been punched really hard in the jaw. And you know, he'll get up again, but it'll take him some time. He's slowing down now. Russia has something of the same insular Asian mindset, perhaps, but it's also quite controlling because it has a Western monotheistic system of governance. And then there is the US, which, for all many of its citizens protest, is the most controlling superpower and arguably the current imperial power active in the world. I know that many of the American citizens want their country's interventions to reduce, but even many of those citizens cannot accept, apparently, that ideologically the US is just another country. So I remain skeptical. You know, the term American exceptionalism has been embraced by more sections of the American community than I, frankly, am comfortable with. And bear in mind, I come from a country which was the previous imperial power, and for some reason, some people in that country still think that maybe if we just go it alone and get out of Europe, we can become that big and influential again. That's ridiculous. But at any given point in time, the position of all the superpowers is a product of history. And if I'm going to sum it up in one rather long sentence, then I would say that the old world happened to be holding the ball of innovation at the time when the Industrial Revolution accelerated the game. And it got the jump on the Eastern powers in this sense. But it also fell into one of the first traps of modernity, possibly because of its small size. And America, the fledgling empire, with its manifest destiny, which is basically a huge amount of resources and space with which to industrialize and grow a population, was perfectly positioned to pick up that opportunity. And this is not sour grapes. That's the way it goes. You make that hustle, kid. You go, girl. But don't actually think that makes you special. And this applies to all individuals all the way down. You know, you come up with a good idea, great. You make that money, billions even. But you're no different to any of the other people in the world in the absolute sense. The modern mass society has billions of lives, and all of them together make up the mass individual that is humanity. And from thoughts like this, I get to the point which says in the modern mass society, we must accept some level of historical materialism from someone like Hegel. History is like a river, and the lives of every individual is just a small eddy or a current in that river. And yes, there will be people, individuals or mass individuals that create a larger kind of cultural eddy in the space of their existence. So we are not destroying, but we are degrading the idea of great person history. Yes, there will be individuals who create waves. And yes, in the tribal era, maybe a single individual could and perhaps even should direct whole cultures. But this is the modern mass society. And if we really do value the individual at an individual level, then the question must be, how do we give each individual person dignity in a time where there are no gods and no men to be raised up as gods? This is where Marx comes in, trying to give meaning to the lives of the masses. But his characterization of historical materialism as a struggle comes from a 20th century zero-sum mindset. And this is well known and discussed by scholars, which is why when I hear talk of trained Marxists or neo-Marxists making some kind of political threat, it strikes me as highly disingenuous and frankly really pisses me off. Alright, fine. Yes, there are definitely things that Marx clearly got wrong, and there are still some anarcho-communists and various other types of people who are trying to make those exact ideas work, but they are fringe ideas, demonstrably false by the sheer fact of their dogmatism. That may not be a strict logical inference there, but really, if someone is holding to Marx that closely, then they're probably missing some of the things he got wrong. There is slightly more concern from a political point of view about the identity-based delineations and some descriptions of that in a Marxist dialectical sense, but there's also some very interesting points to be made there, and that discussion is far from over. It is also another section for later in this series, so let me go back to something simple. Class struggle is bullshit. Class interaction would be a better term, but to be clear, just because the interactions of people and the historical material is some kind of materialistic process, and so presumably at some level follows some kind of physical law, I am not suggesting that we take some scientific approach to this. The dimensionalities of the system are just way too high. There's no way that humanity has the ideas, even the concept of how to sort of calculate the historical material, now and probably ever, unless there's some radical change in our understanding of the universe. But everything I go on to say in this series is in the context of this materialistic historical outlook, which I have definitely brought some Taoist ideas, the sense of the river, the flow of the way, into in the way I think about it. What we as people see is an instant in the convection currents of history. We see the patterns in the broth as they are right now, but what they will bubble and evolve into, we can only guess. If you don't see history in this way like I do, then I would love to hear your comments on why you think it is different. But here's what I don't think. I don't think there is any kind of special quality imbued by history into any one individual or mass individual. There are no scions of history, no sons of heaven, no chosen people, and no divine rights. I will talk about them because thanks to the tribal era, their shadow looms large over the modern mass society. But I want to be clear, I will always consider them in the modern society to be an unwelcome influence.